Welcome back, everyone. I am here today with Vickey Werner, who is an author, certified energy psychology practitioner, essential oil specialist, and past life regression practitioner. She had a near-death experience in 2012, as well as an incredible healing journey, which we're going to talk about today. Vickey, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Likewise. I would love to start by asking you, and for those watching, we will get to the incredible NDE that Vicky had, but her story has so much more to it. And before her NDE, her husband had a healing journey, healing from cancer, and I would love to start by asking you to share about that.
Absolutely. Yes, he was an OBGYN and by trade. Went to medical school, and he was actually the very first laparoscopic surgeon in the state of Utah. He was really dialed in the work, loved being the person who got to watch the heavens open up and new life come into the world. And that was something that was really important to him. However, that work schedule and the lifestyle and the stress of all of the other elements of what that entails for a medical doctor, he ended up developing malignant melanoma at the age of 29. And it was really quite an interesting experience for him. He worked at a hospital that had just got some new imaging equipment. And one day, just visiting with one of the techs with the imaging equipment, he said, I have this little spot on the back, on my back. And his friend was just like, yeah, let's take a look at it and see what's going on. And lo and behold, they found 4 lesions on his spine and 3 on his brain with malignant melanoma. He was given a 6-week sentence, told to go home and get his affairs in order. And this was prior to being married to me, but I know the story really well. He, rather than going home and getting his affairs in order, he went home and got on his knees and prayed. And he knew that he was going to live. And so he just asked God to guide him. And he was told in a dream that night about Dr. Hulda Clark. He had never heard of that name, but in that message, he was told about this woman, and went to work the next day, and somehow his desk had been cleared, and there was a pamphlet sitting on his desk written by this Dr. Hulda Clark. And back in that time, there were so many synchronicities that worked really in his favor. But back in that time, she was available and talked to him on the phone. And she, for those of you who don't know who she was incredible with understanding with parasites and their contribution with cancer. And she had told him to do a number of things that she wrote about in her book, The Cure for All Cancers. And she ended up writing an additional book, The Cure for All Advanced Cancers. She wasn't really allowed to be in the United States with the work that she did. And so she went down to Mexico and had a clinic down there. And he followed all of her guidelines, and rather than passing away in 6 weeks, he lost 40 pounds and did parasite cleansing and all of the things that she recommended, and changed his life. And he ended up regaining full health. And I will say, I know that a lot of people are on the fence with that. And I just want to do a caveat that there is a beautiful gift that the medical world can offer, and we also need to be aware that there's a lot more out there that can help in the healing journey. So that was his experience.
That is amazing. There are so many doctors that are doing work in this field of healing chronic disease, healing cancer, and having their voices suppressed.
That's correct. They are deeply suppressed. That is correct. We can probably agree that big pharma is what runs our country, and we can just kind of leave it there. But I think those who know.
Yes, and there's probably, are you able to share some of the things that he did, or is that not something you can talk about?
Well, I'm certainly not making any claims. This is just from his point of view, but for those who are interested, they can look into her book. But he did parasite cleansing, and he removed all. It was interesting. He was still in his previous marriage at the time, and the only thing he didn't do is leave that marriage, although that was suggested, because she suggested and he ended up leaving the marriage years later. But he was told to remove all toxins in his environment, and that includes toxic relationships.
Yeah.
He was told to remove any kind of processed foods and do parasite cleansing and a number of other protocols that he did. So during that experience for him, it was one of the very first signs that God redirected him, and he was redirected away from allopathic medicine. He left all traditional medicine and went into alternative care. And that didn't necessarily fare well for him as well, but he helped a lot of people. I will say that. A lot of people are alive and doing really well because of his assistance.
Well, I'm so thankful for that and for the people that are willing to do that. So I'll link that book in the description for people to check out. And Vicky, would you like to share about what led up to your NDE and then going into the NDE itself?
Sure. That was the precursor of what led up to my NDE years later. Due to him going into alternative work, he experienced the federal government came after him as well as they did with a number of people. And we were together in 2002, and he was being investigated at that time for medical billing fraud. We knew that was absolutely not a case. There was zero evidence that he committed that, and we thought it was going to be an open and shut case. Unfortunately, it wasn't, because the federal government came after him. And in 2004, I was holding my 1-year-old in my arms, and I was 11 weeks pregnant with my youngest child in his office, and 6 U.S. Marshals entered our business and handcuffed and shackled him for a crime he didn't commit. And he was spent five months in prison. Anyone who knows a little bit about the federal government and the legal system, it's pretty scary. And they have a very high success rate, 98%. Those cases are lost by the people, and it's a very expensive and long, drawn-out journey. And he ultimately did a plea deal, and part of that plea deal was to never practice medicine anywhere in the country at any time for the rest of his life. He left all medicine. He relinquished his license and left all of that behind. And we worked very hard to rebuild our lives, which was catastrophic, to say the least. But we, due to that, years and years of legal battles and the high level of anxiety and a fear that it put into my system of just watching my husband being taken, caused me a lot of duress, and I developed severe complex PTSD. I lived every day in chronic stress, and over the years, I was just chronically afraid that they were going to come after him again. And it was just, we spend our lives always watching our backs and just wondering how something like that could happen. And it does. And it led into our journey of spending many years trying to heal. And so both of us ended up having significant health challenges due to the circumstances of that event, breaking down our bodies. And in 2012, one of the experiences, we went to Peru in July of that year to do a healing journey, and we experienced ayahuasca and sacred journey and met with shaman and all of the things we've tried to keep integrating into our world for healing. Unfortunately, that didn't go well for me. I got really sick and probably should have been in the hospital, but I wasn't. And 2 weeks later, we arrived home still not doing well, and progressed throughout the fall, my body continued to show signs of breakdown. In November of that year, my beautiful sister was given birth to her infant daughter, and I was assisting her as a doula. And as such, I was doing counter pressure points when she was in labor. And at one point during one of those contractions, I collapsed, and I felt my life force leave my body. And somehow she looked at me on the floor, and somehow there was an ability for me to regain and eventually help her again. However, that was the very first sign that something was really not well within me. And I was quite nervous that I was continuing to break down. I developed severe food reactions, and my body shook violently every single day. I wasn't digesting anything that I was eating. At one point, we ended up doing a food reaction test, and we tested for 500 foods, and I was violently reactive to 493 of those. And so my whole gut lining was pretty much pulverized. I had severe leaky gut. My hormones were way off the charts. Cortisol levels were astronomically high. Things were just really not well. And in December, at 3 weeks after my sister's baby was born, I just progressively kept getting worse and worse. And the shaking and the severe seizures in my body were quite frightful. And my husband was doing all that he could to care for me at home, but he was obviously limited what he could support me with. And at one point, I asked him to take me to the emergency room because I was pretty sure I was going to die. And he did take me to the emergency room. He made it clear that he didn't think that they were going to offer anything that was going to be supportive for me, but I was pretty desperate at this point. And we spent many hours in the ER, and they ran all kinds of tests. And I don't know if they felt like I was trying to, I don't know if they felt like I was going through withdrawal symptoms of some sort, or wanting to fix or some level of dependency, but they didn't ever offer me anything for pain. And they basically just sent me home after a number of hours. They said I had gastritis, which is inflammation of the gut lining, and sent me home. And I was devastated and frustrated that they couldn't see how much peril I was in. And I can honestly say, if I describe the level of pain, I think most people are familiar with the 0 to 10 pain scale. The only way I could describe the level of pain that I was in was a 27. I was in astronomically deep pain. It was horrific. And but we went home, and he put me to bed. I wasn't really able to walk at this point. I was continuing to weaken significantly.
Thank you so much for watching. As a way to show my gratitude, I am continuing to offer my one-on-one sessions almost 75% off what they were. I personally love offering the lower prices, and you guys do too, because you've been booking up my sessions and supporting me, which I so much appreciate. My spots are limited to 6 sessions per week, and they fill up extremely fast. So don't wait, book your spot today. You can sign up for a 25-minute energy healing, a 45-minute energy healing and spiritual coaching session, or you can pick a custom session and we can fit the session to meet your needs. We can just talk. Some people just want to talk about deconstruction because they don't have anybody else to talk to. I am here for it. I love meeting you guys face to face and getting to spend some time with you, and I am here to serve you. Book your session here. Now back to the show.
And he put me into bed. I had 3 comforters on me, a heating pad, flannel pajamas, socks, and I still felt like I was in a meat locker. My body was freezing cold every minute. And the following night, I was very, very restless due to just the severe shaking and the pain level. And that evening, I was alone in my bed, and there was a moment where my whole room lit up with a very soft, warm glow. And I was wide awake, so I was just witnessing this glow in my room with a curious wonder. And instantly, I felt myself leave my body and was standing at the foot of the bed looking at the body in bed. And I immediately felt an immense level of compassion for the body that was there. And I could see that my hair was really disheveled from restlessness, and I could see my face was held in a tense form due to the pain. And at that moment, because I'm a mom and I always wonder what time it is, my kids need me, at that moment I looked at the clock and I saw that it was 6:52 p.m. And then I heard my husband's laughter down the hall. He obviously didn't know any of this was going on. He was down the hall in our family room watching television with our two young girls. And I immediately was in the living room with my family. And it was very interesting because I could sense what they were thinking. I had so much love for them. And I also knew they had no idea that I was in the room. I can assure you, when you leave your body, you have the same level of annoyance as you do that you would while you're still in your body, because my husband was watching The Simpsons and our young girls were 7 and 9 at the time. And I was annoyed that he was watching that with them because I felt like it was too advanced for their little minds. But I also had an enormous amount of love for them. And after a moment, for some reason, all of a sudden I was transported onto this large pathway. And on the top of this pathway was a very large boulder at the top of the pathway. And my husband, and I could see my husband was sitting on that pathway, on that boulder. He had our 7-year-old in his lap, and our other children. We both had previous children from previous marriages, and all of our children were circled around him. I was very confused. I could see that they were crying, and I looked at my husband first, and all he could say was, "I love you and I'll be okay." And tears were streaming down his face. I, on the other hand, was very confused, saying, "Okay, with what? I don't know what's going on." I turned my attention to my oldest daughter. She was crying, and she said, "It's okay, Mom, I'll be okay too." And this continued through all my children until I got to my youngest, who was in his lap. And Sophie was staring at me, and she looked frozen in fear and then buried her head in her father's chest. And at that point, my body was moving away from my family and into the unknown. And I was being further pulled onto the pathway, I could see my parents and my siblings were standing on that pathway, and each of them had love for me, but nobody asked me to stay. Nobody told me I'd be missed. They all just said, "We love you and we'll be okay." Beyond them were extended family and friends and associates. And I was aware that all of the people that were on that path were there as a representation of the people that I made an impact on. And in front of me was, the only way I can describe this building was, it was very similar to what we would maybe say the archetype of a haunted mansion. It had a very dilapidated gate around the perimeter. The tree in the yard was dead. All the grass was dead. The bushes were dead. The large black building had sharp spires on the roof, and ravens were looking down at me on the roof. It was very dark. And as I entered through that threshold, and I will tell you, at all costs, I avoid anything frightening, any kind of haunted houses. You will never find me at Halloween at a haunted house, but I wasn't frightened at this time. I was just curious, and I had no control over my ability to move forward anyway. But as I entered through the gate, immediately everything transformed. The gate repaired itself. The tree became very vibrant and alive. The sharp spires on the roof softened into a beautiful golden white dome building. The ravens turned into white doves. All of the yard became alive, and I could hear a beautiful resonance, a beautiful sound resonating. And I think people hear this a lot, but it was true for me as well, that I could feel love emanating from the blades of grass themselves. It was just a very loving, a beautiful, full of life environment. As I stepped through the threshold of the building, I was met by three beings, three entities that were very illuminated and beautiful. And one of them was the spokesperson, but I say spokesperson because it was all communicated telepathically. There weren't actual words, but I understood very clearly what they were communicating to me. And they told me that there were many layers to the embodiment of a human incarnation. And they said that the pathway that I was on was my soul's representation of my journey home. They said that nobody said that they would miss me because none of their consciousness was aware that I was leaving my body. And they said that I was coming home because of severe trauma to my physical body. So as that was being explained to me, three more beautiful beings entered the room. And at that time, somehow my body, my form dropped off of me. And so my external body, which looked exactly like it did moments earlier in my bed, that dropped to the floor. And it was as if my body, without any structure or form, looked like the outfit that you wore on the day before on the floor. And two of those beings that entered picked up the discarded shell of my body and held it very gracefully. And the third one that entered, she was carrying a bowl of a crystal bowl with crystal water, and it had a soft crystal sponge inside. And so they were using that soft crystal sponge to bathe and to heal that layer of my body. When they completed that, and as that was happening, I also looked down at me, and I looked like they did, free of my physical shell. Then they moved me to another part of this area, explaining a number of things. There were three large, beautiful statues. And the first one was the most illuminated. It was the brightest, and they all had precious gems and metals, and they were all gold. Behind those statues was a darkened hallway. And I was told that if I proceeded beyond those statues into that hallway, that I would not be able to return back to Earth. That was the point of no return, is what they were saying. But when they moved me to those three statues, they said that I was being given three gifts, and the first one was the gift of sight. And at that moment, and I assumed that those were representative to the gifts they were giving me. And at that moment, when they said I was given the gift of sight, rather than having a life review, which I know some people do have with an NDE, my experience was immediately there were about 150 videos on the peripheral of me. And I was watching all of these videos of my family and how they would live their lives had I chosen to cross over. I could see my husband went into a deep depression and focused on work, where he pulled away from the family. I could see my mom and siblings trying to encourage him to be part of family dynamics. I could see that my oldest daughter moved home to help raise her two younger sisters. I saw that my son moved away to school and moved away from the support that he had. But interestingly, all of the videos that I was watching as they were growing up, it, as challenging as it was, and I remember seeing videos of how my daughters would sit in bed and laugh and cry and laugh and cry about remembering me, and they leaned on one another quite a bit. But just as they said on the pathway, as hard as it was, they ultimately were okay. until I saw a video of my youngest daughter, and it showed her being mute. That the trauma of losing me. They were telling me that the trauma of losing me would momentarily cause her to be mute, and I was told that she would not live her life purpose if I chose to cross over. And I was told that I was an integral part of her life journey in this embodiment. And so, of course, as a mom, I said, I have to go back. Sophie needs me. And instantaneously, I was back in my bed and back in excruciating pain.
Just a quick break to say thank you to our sponsor, Organic Muscle. You guys know I always have my Reds blend in my Organic Muscle water bottle, and I take this with me everywhere. I'm currently working 70 plus hours a week between 2 jobs, and I've also never felt better physically in my entire life. Energy from morning till night, mental health is sky high, and aside from a high raw fruit diet, circadian rhythm in balance, temperature therapy, and keeping very active, this is one of the main ways I keep my energy up. This is Reds Blend caffeine-free energy. The ingredients are super, super clean, full of fruits and vegetables. I can't recommend this enough. Now back to the show.
And within a few moments, the soft glow left my room, and I saw on the clock 8 minutes had passed. I would say it felt for me approximately 3.5 hours is what it felt like, the time frame. But according to the clock, it was 8 minutes. From that time, I knew my husband was going to, at some point, bring my daughters in to do prayer, that we say prayer together, which he did every night. Shortly later, he did bring the girls in, and my youngest was standing up at the top of my side of my head, and my other daughter, and then my husband, and he held their hands and prayed just like a typical prayer. He just asked for God to heal me, and he asked for blessings for our family and strength. And I was also praying quietly, saying, God, please let me live. I need to live. This was obviously a silent prayer, but he finished the prayer. And at that point, my sweet little girl leaned her little head into my ear, and she whispered, I need you, Mommy. And I was very aware of that due to the experience on the other side moments earlier. I couldn't respond at that point, so all I could do was allow the tears to string from my face and pool inside my ears. And at that point, I just did everything that I could to heal.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'm curious about the haunted mansion that you saw that transformed. What was the significance of that, and why did it transform?
I'm not really sure what that was, but I've spent, from that journey. By the way, I was in bed. I was bedbound for an additional 8 months after that time. So I had a lot of time to think and a lot of time to look that over. But what I think was the case is we live in this third dimension, obviously, on planet Earth. And I think many people are aware that there's multiple dimensions, and the fourth dimension, and then the fifth dimension being heaven. I really think what was happening as I was going through the various dimensions, and possibly in the waiting place, or also known as Bardo, and then if I were to cross beyond that hallway, I would have entered into the fifth dimension, into the heavenly realms. But I think that was an example of the density and the frequency of the various areas, that this was a frequency shift that was being shown to me.
That makes so much sense. You mentioned that you were given 3 gifts, and that one of them was the gift of sight. What were the other 2 gifts?
It was never told to me. I jumped the gun and left before they told me what those were. So I don't know that I can honestly say what those other two gifts. I was really actually pretty bummed about that actually. I wanted to know as well. But yeah, the only one that was actually explained to me was the gift of sight.
Is the gift of sight, is that something that you're conscious of being able to use now?
Yeah, initially I wasn't really sure. I thought that was maybe they were showing me the videos of how my family's lives were going to live without me. So initially I did think that. However, I've been really blessed in working with a practitioner after some severe loss that I've had these last 2 years of just over the years I've developed a second sight that that has been pretty phenomenal. And I don't make any claims, but I see things that I have never seen before and that are definitely not of this world. So it's definitely beyond our physical senses of sight. So I would say that has been something that I've developed after that.
Are you able to share what any of those things are, or is it private?
Oh, absolutely. But I'll be jumping the gun a little bit about how my life goes. Are we okay to move on to the next story?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, I still wanted to continue to do a lot of healing work. My nervous system was really severely damaged. I have very, very sensitive nervous system, and the trauma of all of that was quite challenging. And so I continued to work on finding any kind of healing modality that I could find. I was constantly felt like I was on the front row of any kind of healing modality to support my nervous system and the dysregulation of my body. But I trained to become a clinical EFT practitioner doing tapping, and saw the science about how miraculous that is for rewiring the brain and for healing. It was originally used a lot for combat people who were in the military and suffered from some complex PTSD as well. But the science and the studies showed some really great success. And so while I was in school to get my own degree on that, I started working with another practitioner. And what's really beautiful when somebody does tapping is we tap into the subconscious. And of course, that's where a lot of our behaviors and beliefs and programs are all stored around there. And as a side note, in order to have healing, we need to know a few elements that the trauma and the emotions are stored in the physical body. And in order to, our brain is always in communication, of course, with our body. And we have these meridians that come down both sides of our body. And all of these meridians have what's called an endpoint. In Chinese acupuncture, these endpoints are really well known, but these meridians all attach to our amygdala, which is the fight or flight part of our brain. And so I was working with this practitioner that's a very good friend of mine. And I finally got to the point where I said, hey, I want to do the big work. I've done all the peripheral work that I can, but I need to stare the tiger in the eye and address what was taking place. And so we did this beautiful session. We worked for a number of months. And so by January of 2024, I was having a session with her. And that was the day I said, hey, I want to know why all of this took place. And we went back to the day that my husband was arrested, and worked on my nervous system through that experience. And we finished up. There were a number of elements that were revealed in that session to me, but as we were finishing up to the time where the federal agents had taken him, I could see that I wasn't allowed to touch him when they arrested him. They did allow him to take off his wedding ring and leave his wallet and the keys to the car on the counter. And then they took him out into the parking lot, which is right after lunch. And so our business was in an office complex, and everybody in that whole complex was coming back from lunch and seeing him standing there with handcuffs and shackles. And that was obviously a very challenging experience. But in this tapping session, I suddenly had this experience where I left my body, and there were other versions. This can get kind of broad, but I was told this was the 7th lifetime that my husband and I have had this similar experience. And so there were 3 versions on one side and 3 on the other of these other lifetimes that I had lived. And then me in the center. And at this point, I could see that this beautiful woman approached me. And I assume she's my primary guide, although she did not tell me what her role is with me, but she was very lovely and clearly very, very wise. And she came forward, and I just said, we just want to know why. Why did we go through this experience? And she motioned about the other 6 versions of me. And she said, those versions of you are not developed enough to understand what I'm about to say to you, but you've been doing your work in this world, and your consciousness is developed to the level that you can understand a degree of what I'm about to share. But she said, not only did you sign up for this life experience, but you requested it. And not only did you request it, God granted you the opportunity to have this experience, because going through these levels of challenges, the potential for soul development is immense. However, it takes a great deal of it. She explained that there's a web of details that take a great deal from the spirit world to ensure that specific challenges take place. And she reminded me that God doesn't set us up for failure. So there's a great deal of caution. And she said that there were times where we had another lifetime where I ended up taking my life because of the challenges. But she was explaining that all to me. And then it was such a perception shift for me to go, not only did we sign up for that, but we requested it. And I was just absorbing all of that information, and it was mind-blowing for me. At the end of that, she cautioned me, and she lifts her hand up like this, and she said, I need to tell you one more thing before you go. And so here I am. I'm like, okay, with excitement. And she said, you're going to experience a significant loss in either March or April, but you're going to be okay. You will also be taken to the point of almost breaking you, but not. And I was like, wow, okay. And then she showed me this large blue balloon arch. And she said, you are 6 yards to the finish line. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but she made those very clear messages to me. And I finished the session with my friend. I went upstairs to my husband and I explained, not only did we sign up for this, but we requested it, and God doesn't set us up for failure. And I'm 6 yards to the finish line. I don't know what that means. She said, I'm going to experience a significant loss in either March or April. And my husband was just listening, and right before he was heading out to work, and gave me a kiss and headed out the door. And unfortunately, exactly 6 weeks to the day, my husband collapsed and died in front of me. And it was in March. And then the devastation of that, 4 months later, I also lost my precious only son. Oh. And so due to some clerical error, I've been in a horrific probate case with my husband's adult children who never lived in our life. Since then, it's been brutal and has indeed taken me to the point of almost breaking me. And I left my home because there were just too many memories. It was just too much to the memories of my husband and son in that home. And so my 2 young girls and I moved into a hotel for 3 months, and eventually were able to get in the home that I'm in now, next door to my family, which has been really supportive on this journey.
Thank you so much for sharing, and my heart goes out to you in that experience. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's so interesting because that's a really common thing is people, because it is so immense and it's so hard to imagine. My husband and I, we had 22 beautiful years of marriage, and we traveled the world. We were very blessed. We celebrated our anniversary every year at a different place, and we actually renewed our wedding vows in 33 countries.
Wow.
And we had just celebrated our anniversary in the Florida Keys, and he promised me many more years. And 11 days later, he unfortunately collapsed in front of me. So I also can't imagine, and I live it. It's sometimes when I think about it, it's almost too much for me to bear as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the most intense things about being here, I think, is loving that deeply and having to understand that nothing is permanent here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say for your audience, I've been very blessed with the support that I've had. My siblings, my mom, my friends, I've been very, very blessed to have that support. My children, our youngest had just turned 19 2 days before her father's passing. And, if you know somebody who's experienced some kind of loss, it's great to have the support. And people show up in those early days, but your brain is in so much shock that you can't even take it in anyway. And it's wonderful to have that level of support. I think God's grace is with us for sure. But I was also keenly aware that once the funerals are over and everybody goes back to your life, about week 3 is when the reality hits, and it hits really hard. It hits really hard. And so I want to say, for anybody who's listening, reach out to the young adults and reach out to the children, because they don't have in their network of friends or people that they know who have the consciousness that can support somebody who's experienced loss. Many of them haven't experienced that themselves. In fact, our 19-year-old, she came home for the weekend for her birthday, celebrated her birthday. The next day, she went up to school, and then got the phone call of her father's passing. And she walked into her dorm in so much shock, talking to her sister, and she told her roommate, she said, "My dad just died." And her friend her roommate was scrolling on Instagram and looked up and just basically said, "Oh, sorry," and went right back to her phone.
Oh, wow.
And did not have the capacity to even say the simplest, like, "How can I show up for you?" And so I want to encourage, please reach out to people and just keep reminding, don't come from the "what do you need?" because what they need is their loved one who just passed, and you can't offer that. But do what you can offer. If it's babysitting, if it's cleaning, or if it's pulling weeds, taking the dog for a walk, taking a meal, checking in, sitting with them, whatever your capacity of support, do that. And then the other thing that I would like to share is so many people, and I know it's with good intention, and I appreciate the intention. So many people will say, "You're so strong. You're so strong." And I want to say, what does that even mean? Because does it mean that I'm actually in my physical body? Then I guess. But saying that to somebody who has just experienced such a catastrophic loss, they're not feeling very strong. And they may present that they're keeping their body together, keeping their act together. But 15 minutes earlier, they may have been sobbing on the shower floor. And that night, they may be on their closet floor or in their bed crying themselves to sleep. So they're not feeling really strong. And all it does is give that person Now they have to say, well, now I appear strong to you, so I have to keep appearing strong, but I'm not feeling strong. And so one thing that I would encourage is, rather than using that language, and again, I respect the intention, but the very gentle shift of saying, you're okay, you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. And because I just asked all the time, am I going to be okay? And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is we need safety first. So the thing that I have had, in fact, one of my very good friends, her husband passed this morning. And so my heart has been with her. I know exactly what that feels and looks like. And the language that I shift is, you're safe. In this moment, you're safe and you're going to be okay. And we sometimes need to be reminded of that over and over. And it's just a simple way of saying, I hear you, I love you, and I'm reminding your brain and body and nervous system that you're going to be okay. And I'm reminding you that you're safe and that I'm here. And there isn't a way to fix what hurts. There isn't a way to fix what's broken, but showing up with compassion, loving compassion, and gentle energy. And for those who have passed, and I've taught it for a number of years, and then I had to experience it myself. There's only 3 things we have to do once we've experienced a loss, and that's to rest as much as you can. But I promise you, it's virtually impossible to get the sleep you need. To eat gently and nourish your body gently, and to move your body gently. Those 3 things: sleep, eat, move your body. And I will tell you, those are the simplest, most basic things, and they are the hardest things for you to do at that moment, but it's necessary. So at the very least, bring a loved one a meal, snuggle up with them on the couch, and take them for a walk. Just those things, just those things.
Thank you so much for sharing that really practical advice. I think a lot of times people get stuck because they want to say or do something meaningful, but they're afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And so that's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And one other thing is, it's really painful to witness grief. It's very physical. I've watched my family. I mean, of course, they loved my son. They lost their nephew and they lost their brother-in-law. And it's been really challenging for them too. And, they to witness the grief and the pain that they've witnessed me experience has been really hard for them. It's hard to witness grief. And so we want, as the individual experiencing it, we want to beat grief to the punch. So for me, I got super busy, very overstimulated. I just kept trying to do everything I can to get to the other side of grief. And I promise you never arrive. And then with the loved ones that are around, they want to fix. They want to fix. Everybody wants to fix because it hurts to see and witness. But there isn't anything you can say or do. Just be present and just show up. And, it's that very awkward silence, but it's so necessary because grief needs to be witnessed. Healing needs to be witnessed. And sometimes just bearing witness with an open heart is all that it takes.
Yeah, so well said. Is there anything that you would like to share with people who are going through the grieving process?
Yeah. Well, for me, one thing that was very challenging for me, because I was madly in love with my husband. We were, we did have an enviable marriage, and unfortunately, due to the circumstances of his children that I loved as my own, I was an amazing stepmom to the 5 of them. And then the rejection and pain that they did, my husband's family completely ghosted me and my girls, and his children took me through a brutal court case, which already was so challenging because of all the court system that we had when my husband was arrested the first time. They made it their intention to make me homeless, and it was all due to a clerical error because the trust that we had, the attorney didn't have my husband sign the last page, and everything was around his estate, and my language was his estate was my life, because that's all I knew too for 22 years. That was, so I want to say, anybody who is potential, you don't want to go through probate, make sure things are in order. But as a spouse, it's very common to be very angry. I've been angry with my husband because he left so many unfinished business in it, and I literally had to set down my entire life for over a year and a half of just handling the details of his life. So little things that I finally ended up doing is I started taking a piano lesson just so that I could do something for me. I wanted to do something for me. And then I just kept wondering, what are the rules? It was weird for me. It was weird for me when people would get married right away. And then I was also would see people that never remarried, and I assumed I was never going to date again, or I thought, well, I already found the one. That's what it is. But due to the horrific probate and just feeling beaten down, the only way I could describe how my life was my soul was weary. It was beyond physical exhaustion. My soul was weary, and I didn't lose faith in God, but I did really teeter on losing faith in my capacity to keep going. And so about 4.5 months ago, I was just really at a breaking point, and that whole language of taking me to the point of almost breaking me, but not. There were many times I would look up into the heavens and in prayer saying, okay, I've been beyond that point. And I know that anger is a mask of the intense grief. But I had to come to Jesus with my husband and with God, Jesus, whoever was listening on the other side. And late one night, I was just breaking down, and I just said, either fix this or get me off the planet, because I can't keep going. Although I didn't want to take my own life, because I never wanted to put my children through more pain. And I knew that I needed to be here. But sometimes life is too heavy to carry by yourself. And I was here strictly out of obligation to meet the needs of other people, but not to the point where I felt like there was any hope for myself. And it was one of those times where, like, God, I'm not kidding. I need you to answer this prayer. And a day and a half later, I got a random text by somebody that I had a massive crush on 39 years earlier, in sophomore in high school. We never dated, but I did have a crush on him. And out of the blue, he reached out. He had seen a couple of posts that I had made regarding my husband and son. And he just reached out to say that he had seen them, and, asked if I had remembered him, and just wanted to say he was sorry to hear about the loss that I had. And long story short, we ended up taking it to the phone, and our first phone conversation lasted for 7 hours, and we were officially started dating 20 months after my husband's passing. And it's been really beautiful, because it gives me a reason to smile again. But regarding about somebody who's grieving as a widow, one of the things that was a challenge for me is, what are the rules? What are the social expectations? What are the rules that I set for me? What are the rules that I had made promise to my husband? I don't want to look like I'm betraying our marriage. And yet I knew that I was dying inside with the loss of my husband and son. And I didn't know how other people would respond. And, unfortunately, I still, to say that we don't care what other people think, I think is a trauma response too. We should always care what other people think. I mean, we can't make our lives determined on that, but we're all part of the same village. And so I was very sensitive to that. And I didn't know how my children were going to respond or how other people, but I knew that I wanted to smile again. And I was grateful that I had a reason to smile again. And so I had another session with this friend of mine, and it was really lovely for me. That was very helpful back then at that time. And that whole session, I just asked, what are the rules? And the 5 rules that came to me are this: 1, be kind. And one thing I'm very sure of, that when I experienced this level of loss, I was very keenly aware that the world is hurting. I'm not the only one who's in pain. And I certainly won't want the trophy at the end of my life to say that I suffered the most. Nobody really wants that trophy, but the world is hurting. So be kind. And 2, be generous of heart. Know that each one of us are carrying a cross bigger than we can carry sometimes by ourselves. And when there's a way that you can be of service to somebody, show up, even if it's just a smile, even if it's just to hold a hand, or say a prayer. But go into prayer and ask, how can I be of service to this individual? And then follow that guidance. And then 3, have love of self, because we, not from a narcissistic standpoint, but to truly love our life, love the journey that we are on, love our bodies, treat our bodies as a temple, treat our minds and our physical bodies as a work in progress, and be patient when we're not perfect. We weren't here to be perfect. We're here to grow. And it's all of its mess that we still deserve to have love for self. And then the 4th one is to have love for humanity, because pain is universal, grief is universal, loss is universal, but so is joy, so are miracles, so is love and anticipation. All of those things. Love what life offers for us and have the love for humanity. And then the 5th one is everything else is up to you. Do what feels right for you. Follow your own inner compass. Do what feels right. Find the genius within you and lead with an open heart.
Thank you so much for sharing. Did you ever find out what 6 yards to the finish line meant?
Well, the 6 yards to the finish line, I assumed meant the 6 weeks to my husband's passing. So that was that's the way that it was said to me. I know that she couldn't have told me that my husband was going to die on March 11th, because of course I would have done everything I can to protect that. So I think that was the way that the symbolism that she was trying to explain.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again so much for being willing to share about these experiences and what you've learned through walking through it to help others who are going through similar things. I think that the things that you've shared tonight could be a lifeline to other people.
Thank you. I truly believe that I couldn't have gone through all of these challenges just for myself. And so I'm learning as much as everybody else. I'm on the journey as much as everybody else. I have moments where I have hope, and I'm grateful for those. And I have moments when I'm struggling, and I'm grateful for the people around me who are loving me through that as well. So thank you very much.
Yes. Would you like to share with people where they can find you?
Yes, I have a website, and I will say a little caveat. I've gone through a lot these last couple of years, so there's a few things that aren't updated, but my website is VickeyWerner.com. I do past life regressions. I was very blessed to study under Dolores Cannon, and I did also do some study with Brian Weiss. I studied with Dolores Cannon back in 2006. So QHHT is her methodology for past life regressions. And I can't do those over Zoom, but I have other past life regression modality that I can do over Zoom for those, or in person. I also am starting back up with the EFT as a clinical EFT practitioner. And for those in my books here to the side of me, my book, The Secret to Healing and Recovery, and it's available on Amazon and as well as on Audible. And in my book, I share much more about my healing journey and my near-death experience, and the modalities that I have in that book are all modalities to support the individual who has possibly seen multiple doctors and not found the reason to why their body isn't healing. And so I have everything from essential oils and bone broth and tapping and many other things as well. And then I also, in the back chapter, I have a guide for caregivers who have a loved one who is either on some kind of healing paradigm or in a long-term or terminal illness, and to support the caregivers, because I think those who have been a caregiver, that's one of the shadows we have in our culture today. It's a very heavy burden to carry, and I want to do a loving shout out to those who are carrying that burden, and know that you're not alone.
I will have those links in the description for people. And the final question that I ask all my guests is, if you could give one message to everyone on the planet, what would it be?
My message that I would give to everyone is, on a conscious level, we wouldn't choose the challenges that we have. We look at our lives, and there is no way that many of us would choose the challenges that we have on a conscious level. But on a spiritual level, there is no greater growth opportunity and awakening of the higher self, and the moving forward of the soul to endure the challenges. And yes, sometimes the burdens are very heavy. I can attest to that as well. But when we observe those challenges through grace, we can see that everyone has times that we have the challenges. We, rather than focusing on what those challenges are, look for those that are helping, because there's always going to be somebody who's going to reach a hand. And, my friend said something very lovely to me after my husband's passing. And he said that I've just entered the club that nobody wants to be in. And it's the hardest club you will ever join. But when you join that club, there better be somebody at the door, and I'm going to be at that door.